There is a particular kind of cooking that only develops under pressure. Not the pressure of a professional kitchen, the pressure of a near-empty pantry, a family to feed, and very little money to do it with. The kind of pressure that forces creativity, efficiency, and a relationship with ingredients so intimate that nothing goes to waste. Not a vegetable stem, not a cup of leftover rice, not the last scrape of miso from the bottom of a tub. Japan has centuries of that pressure. A country that for most of its history had limited land, limited resources, and a population that needed to eat well on very little. And what emerged from that pressure was not deprivation food. It was some of the most satisfying, most deeply flavored, most cleverly constructed everyday cooking in the world. These are the meals Japanese families made when money was tight, and 4 people still needed to be fed well. Most cost less than $1 per serving. All of them feed a family of 4 comfortably, and every single one of them tastes considerably better than the price suggests it has any right to. Number 17. Tamago kake gohan, raw egg over rice. Hot cooked rice, 1 raw egg cracked directly on top, a splash of good soy sauce, mixed together vigorously until the egg coats every grain and begins to cook slightly in the residual heat of the rice. The hot rice partially cooks the egg as you stir, creating a creamy, rich coating that turns plain rice into something that feels genuinely indulgent. The soy sauce adds saltiness and depth. The egg adds protein and richness. A drop of sesame oil if you have it, a pinch of togarashi for heat, a sheet of nori torn alongside. The whole thing takes 90 seconds to assemble and costs almost nothing. Use the freshest eggs available because the yolk is essentially raw. In Japan, eggs sold specifically for this dish are guaranteed same-day fresh. The better the egg, the better the dish. But even a standard supermarket egg over good hot rice with a splash of soy is something that millions of Japanese people eat voluntarily as adults. Not because they have to, but because it is genuinely, unreasonably good for what it costs. Feeds 4 for the cost of 4 eggs and a bowl of rice each. Number 16. Ochazuke, green tea poured over rice. Ochazuke is what happens when you have leftover rice, a pot of green tea, and almost nothing else, and it manages to be one of the most quietly satisfying things you can eat. Place leftover rice, cold or reheated, in a deep bowl. Pour hot green tea or warm dashi broth directly over the rice until it is submerged. The liquid softens the rice into something between a soup and a porridge. Then add whatever you have. A pickled plum, umeboshi, is traditional and transforms the entire bowl with its salty, sour intensity. A sprinkle of toasted sesame seeds. A sheet of nori torn into pieces. A few flakes of leftover grilled fish. A spoonful of tinned salmon. The pickled plum alone is enough to make a bowl of tea-soaked rice taste complete. A jar of umeboshi costs a few dollars and lasts months. Combined with leftover rice and a pot of green tea, it feeds 4 people for virtually nothing and takes less than 5 minutes from start to finish. It is the kind of meal that feels like it was made with care even when it was assembled from almost nothing, which is exactly the point. Number 15. Tonjiru, pork and miso soup. Tonjiru is miso soup's more substantial winter cousin, and one of the most beloved everyday meals in Japan precisely because of how much it delivers for how little it costs. Small pieces of cheap pork belly or pork offcuts, the fatty, inexpensive parts of the animal that nobody else wants, simmered in dashi with daikon radish, carrot, burdock root, konjac, and potato until everything is completely tender and the broth has absorbed the fat and flavor from the pork, finished with miso dissolved into the broth. A drop of sesame oil, sliced spring onion on top. Those cheap cuts that cost almost nothing become tender, deeply flavored, and almost unrecognizable as the bargain pieces they started, as after slow simmering in good dashi. The broth is rich without being heavy. The vegetables are soft and sweet. The miso ties everything together into something that tastes like it has been cooking for considerably longer than it has. A pot costs a few dollars and feeds 4 people generously with enough left for the following day. It is thick enough to be a complete meal with rice alongside. One of the most popular school lunch dishes in Japan, which tells you everything about its role as reliable, affordable, genuinely loved everyday food. Number 14. Natto gohan, fermented soybeans over rice. Natto divides people the first time. It converts most of them by the third. Fermented soybeans with a sticky, stringy texture and a powerful, complex flavor. Pungent, savory, and deeply umami in a way that nothing else quite replicates. A small packet costs almost nothing at any Asian grocery store. Stir the natto vigorously in its packet with the included mustard and soy sauce until it becomes extremely sticky and the strings stretch long. The stirring develops the flavor and texture. Pour over hot rice. Add a raw egg yolk in the center. Top with chopped spring onion and a sprinkle of togarashi. Natto is extraordinarily high in protein and probiotics. It is one of the most nutritionally dense foods available at its price point. Combined with rice, it is a complete meal that costs almost nothing per serving and keeps you full for hours. In Japan, it is eaten at breakfast by millions of people every single morning. Not as an endurance exercise, but as a genuinely wanted meal that happens to cost almost nothing and be extraordinarily good for you simultaneously. Number 13. Tamagoyaki Don, rolled egg rice bowl. 3 eggs per person sounds generous until you consider that the technique transforms those eggs into something considerably more satisfying than scrambled or fried. Beat the eggs with a splash of dashi, a teaspoon of soy sauce, a teaspoon of mirin, and a pinch of sugar. Cook in thin layers in a rectangular tamagoyaki pan or any nonstick pan. Pour a thin layer, let it set partially, roll it to one end, pour another thin layer underneath, let it set, roll again. The result is a firm, layered, sweet savory egg roll that is sliced and laid over a bowl of rice with a drizzle of soy sauce and a pile of grated daikon alongside. The tamagoyaki technique makes 3 eggs look and taste like considerably more than 3 eggs. It appears in every Japanese lunchbox in the country for a reason. It is satisfying, visually attractive, protein-rich, and costs almost nothing. As a rice bowl topping with a bowl of miso soup alongside it is a complete and deeply satisfying family meal assembled from the most basic ingredients in any kitchen. Number 12. Kenchinjiru, Buddhist vegetable soup. Originally a temple dish from Kamakura, developed by Buddhist monks who were prohibited from eating meat, and needed to create satisfying, warming meals from only vegetables and tofu. The constraints they cooked under were severe. The dish they produced is extraordinary. A clear dashi broth, or plain water with a piece of kombu if dashi is not available, filled with firm tofu broken into rough pieces, daikon, carrot, burdock root, konjac, and any other root vegetables available. Everything cut into bite-sized pieces and simmered until completely tender, seasoned with soy sauce and sake. A few drops of sesame oil stirred in at the end. No meat, no expensive ingredients, just cheap root vegetables, firm tofu, and a dashi base that makes everything inside it taste rich, warming, and deeply savory. The burdock root adds an earthy depth that elevates the entire broth. The tofu absorbs the flavor of the soup and becomes something considerably more interesting than it started as. A pot costs almost nothing and feeds 4 people twice. It is one of the oldest budget meals in Japanese culinary history and one of the most genuinely satisfying. Number 11. Chazuke with tinned salmon. Ochazuke elevated slightly with the addition of the cheapest tinned protein available. Tinned salmon, available in any supermarket for $1 or $2, broken into flakes over leftover rice. Hot, strong dashi poured over the top until the rice is submerged. A pickled plum placed in the center. A sheet of nori torn over the surface. Toasted sesame seeds. A drop of soy sauce. The salmon flakes into the broth as you eat, adding flavor and protein to every mouthful. The dashi is deeply savory. The pickled plum cuts through the richness with its sharp, salty sourness. The nori adds a subtle oceanic depth. The whole bowl tastes like considerably more than its components suggest. A tin of salmon and a pot of dashi feed 4 people for almost nothing and take less than 5 minutes to assemble. It is the meal you make when the fridge is almost empty and everyone still needs something warm and filling. Number 10. Nikujaga, meat and potato stew. Nikujaga, literally meat and potatoes, is Japan's answer to the kind of stew every culture develops when it needs to feed a family on very little. And like all the best versions of that dish, it is considerably more than the sum of its parts. Thinly sliced cheap beef or pork, the thinnest, cheapest cuts available, added to a pot with potatoes cut into large pieces, onion cut into wedges, and carrot. Everything simmered together in dashi, soy sauce, mirin, and a little sugar until the potatoes are completely tender. and the liquid has reduced to a thick, sweet, savory glaze that coats every piece in the pot. The meat is used in small quantities, enough to flavor the broth and add protein without driving up the cost. The potatoes do the filling work. The dashi and soy sauce glaze makes everything taste like it has been braised for hours, in something considerably more expensive than it was. It is one of the most nostalgic, most universally loved everyday meals in Japan, the dish that people describe when they talk about what their grandmother used to make. A pot feeds 4 people generously for a few dollars, and tastes even better the following day when the flavors have had time to develop further. Number 9. Miso soup with tofu and whatever is left. Not a specific recipe, a system, and the most important system on this entire list. Dashi brought to a gentle simmer in a pot. Miso paste dissolved into it. Never boiled, always added at the end off the heat to preserve the complex fermented flavor. Whatever is in the fridge, added in order of how long it takes to cook. Root vegetables and firm tofu go in first and simmer for 5 minutes. Softer vegetables and mushrooms go in next. Silken tofu and leafy greens go in last, just before the miso is added. The result is always different because the ingredients change based on what is available. It always tastes right because the dashi and miso base carries everything and makes cheap ingredients taste deeply savory and considered. A tub of miso costs a few dollars and lasts weeks. Combined with whatever vegetables need using and a block of tofu, it produces a complete, warming, nutritionally balanced meal for 4 people at almost no cost. Every Japanese household makes this several times a week. It is not a backup meal or a compromise. It is simply how Japanese families eat, efficiently, flexibly, and well. Number 8. Zosui, rice porridge from leftover soup. The most efficient meal on this list because it is made entirely from things that have already been cooked. When there is leftover miso soup, nabe broth, or any simmered dish in the pot from the previous evening, Japanese home cooks add cooked rice directly to the remaining broth and simmer everything together over gentle heat until the rice swells and absorbs the liquid, creating a thick, warming porridge. A beaten egg stirred in at the end creates soft, silky ribbons throughout the porridge. A drop of soy sauce, a sprinkle of spring onion, a sheet of torn nori on top. Zosui turns the remnants of last night's dinner into today's breakfast or lunch without any additional ingredients and almost no additional cost. It feeds 4 people from what most Western households would pour directly down the drain. The resulting porridge is warm, deeply savory, and far more satisfying than its recycled origins suggest. It is one of the most honest expressions of the Japanese principle of using everything completely. Number 7. Yakisoba, fried noodles. Yakisoba is Japan's street food answer to the question of how to feed 4 people quickly, cheaply, and with maximum satisfaction. Cheap wheat noodles, the kind sold in blocks for almost nothing at any Asian grocery store. A quarter of a cabbage shredded, a carrot cut into thin strips, a small amount of pork belly sliced thin or no meat at all. Everything stir-fried together in a hot pan until the cabbage is wilted and the noodles are slightly caramelized at the edges. Yakisoba sauce added, a sweet, savory, slightly tangy mixture of Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce, oyster sauce, and ketchup, and tossed together until every strand is coated. Topped with aonori seaweed flakes, pickled red ginger, and a drizzle of Kewpie mayonnaise. The combination of the sweet savory sauce, the caramelized noodles, the pickled ginger cutting through the richness, and the creamy mayonnaise is one of the most addictive flavor combinations in Japanese street food. Costs almost nothing, takes 15 minutes. Feeds 4 people and tastes like festival food. There is no version of this meal that leaves anyone feeling like they ate cheaply. Number 6. Tofu dengaku, miso-glazed tofu. This dish demonstrates more clearly than almost anything else the Japanese ability to transform an inexpensive ingredient into something that feels considered and complete through technique alone. A block of firm tofu pressed dry between paper towels to remove excess moisture, cut into thick slices, pan-fried in a little neutral oil until golden brown and slightly crisp on both sides. The Maillard reaction creating a crust that changes the texture of the tofu entirely from the soft, plain block it started as. A glaze of miso paste, mirin, sake, and a little sugar mixed together and brushed generously over each slice, placed under a hot grill for 60 seconds until the glaze bubbles, caramelizes, and turns a deep, sticky, lacquered brown. The glaze is everything. Sweet, savory, deeply fermented, slightly smoky from the caramelization. It transforms plain tofu into something that you could serve to someone who claims to dislike tofu and watch them eat it without complaint. Served over rice with a simple vegetable side and a bowl of miso soup, it is a complete meal for 4 people that costs almost nothing and tastes far beyond what that cost suggests. Number 5. Tamago soup, Japanese egg drop soup. Dashi brought to a gentle simmer in a pot, seasoned with soy sauce, a little mirin, and a pinch of salt until it tastes deeply savory and balanced. A tablespoon of potato starch or cornstarch dissolved in cold water stirred in to thicken the broth slightly. 2 beaten eggs poured in slowly from a height while stirring the broth in a circular motion. The egg set immediately on contact with the hot liquid, creating soft, silky, irregularly shaped ribbons of cooked egg distributed throughout the thickened broth. Spring onion sliced thin scattered over the top, a few drops of sesame oil, a pinch of white pepper. The thickened broth clings to the egg ribbons and creates a soup that feels considerably more substantial than its ingredients suggest. Served alongside rice and a simple side dish, it is a complete, warming meal for 4 people, assembled from a handful of eggs and a pot of dashi. The cost is almost negligible. The result is quietly extraordinary. Number 4. Hiyashi chuka, cold noodles in summer. When summer arrives and cooking feels like a form of punishment, hiyashi chuka solves the problem of feeding 4 people well without generating significant heat in the kitchen. Cold wheat noodles, cooked and rinsed immediately under cold running water until chilled completely, then drained and laid in a bowl. Topped with whatever is available and affordable: thin strips of cucumber, a handful of shredded cabbage, a few slices of boiled egg, some canned tuna, or a little ham, pickled ginger, shredded nori, a dressing of soy sauce, rice vinegar, sesame oil, a teaspoon of sugar, and a little water poured generously over everything. The dressing is the key. Tangy, savory, slightly sweet, deeply sesame scented. It makes any combination of toppings taste cohesive and complete. The noodles are filling. The toppings are entirely flexible and can be adjusted to whatever is cheapest on the day. The dressing costs pennies to make. The result is a complete, refreshing, genuinely satisfying meal that requires almost no heat, almost no money, and almost no effort. On a hot summer evening, it is exactly what 4 people need. Number 3. Onigiri, rice balls. Onigiri is Japan's original portable meal and one of the clearest expressions of the principle that the simplest things done well are often the most satisfying. Cooked rice seasoned with a little salt, hands wetted and salted, a handful of rice placed in the palm, a small indentation made in the center, a filling placed inside, a pickled plum, a spoonful of tinned tuna mixed with kewpie, a piece of salted salmon, a teaspoon of seasoned natto, and the rice pressed firmly around it into a triangle, a strip of nori wrapped around the outside. The fillings are entirely flexible. Use whatever is cheapest and available. The rice is the meal. The filling is the flavor. A pot of rice and a jar of pickled plums makes enough onigiri to feed 4 people for lunch or dinner at the cost of almost nothing. 2 or 3 onigiri per person is filling, complete, and portable. The act of making them, hands wet, rice pressed into shape, the repetitive forming of each triangle, is one of the most meditative things you can do in a kitchen. And what comes out is something that has fed Japanese people on trains, in schools, in offices, at festivals, and at home for centuries, because it works perfectly at every level. Number 2. Kakitama jiru, silken egg soup. Simpler and more delicate than the egg drop soup listed above, kakitama jiru is a dish so refined and so satisfying that it is hard to believe it costs almost nothing to make. Dashi heated to just below a simmer, seasoned with a little soy sauce and salt until the broth tastes clean and deeply savory. Beaten egg poured in very slowly in a thin, steady stream while stirring the broth very gently. So gently that the egg sets in extremely fine, almost transparent, soft threads rather than the thicker ribbons of a more aggressively stirred egg drop soup. The result is a broth that appears almost clear but contains clouds of the most delicate cooked egg suspended throughout. Served in lacquer bowls with a sprig of mitsuba or a few leaves of spring onion and a piece of yuzu peel if available. The presentation is simple and beautiful. The flavor is quiet, deeply savory, and extraordinarily comforting. It is the kind of soup that makes you feel looked after in a way that is difficult to explain. It costs almost nothing. It takes 10 minutes. And it demonstrates more clearly than almost any other dish that Japanese cooking at its best is about technique and attention, rather than expensive ingredients. Number 1. Ichiju Sansai, the structure that feeds a family forever. 1 soup, 3 sides, rice. This is not a recipe. It is not a specific meal. It is the structure that has fed Japanese families for centuries, regardless of what was available or affordable on any given day. And it is the most powerful idea on this entire list. The rice is always there. Cheap, filling, nutritious, the foundation of every meal. The soup is always miso or a simple dashi broth. The base costs almost nothing and absorbs whatever needs using. The 3 sides are whatever is cheapest and freshest that day. A small piece of grilled fish that cost $1. A dish of simmered spinach with sesame dressing that cost 50 cents. A small bowl of pickles made 3 days ago from a cabbage that was about to turn. The genius of Ichiju Sansai is that the structure itself makes any combination of cheap ingredients feel like a complete and considered meal. A bowl of rice, a bowl of miso soup, 3 small dishes, regardless of how modest each component is, the combination looks like enough, feels like enough, and provides enough nutrition, variety, and satisfaction to constitute a real meal. This structure has fed Japanese families through poverty, through war, through scarcity of every kind. It still feeds them today, not because they cannot afford more, but because the system works so well and the meals it produces are so genuinely satisfying that more is rarely necessary. Learn this structure. Apply it to whatever is cheapest at your market on any given day. Feed 4 people well for almost nothing. Japan figured this out a very long time ago. 17 meals, all of them built from cheap, available, ordinary ingredients. All of them capable of feeding 4 people well for almost nothing. Japan did not develop these meals despite its poverty. It developed them because of it. And what that pressure produced, over centuries of necessity and creativity, is a way of eating that is more satisfying, more nutritious, and more cleverly constructed than food that costs 10 times as much. The pantry does not need to be full to feed a family well. It needs to be understood. It needs to be used with intention, with knowledge of what each ingredient can do, and with a structure that makes any combination of simple things feel complete. Japan has been feeding families that way for centuries. Now you know how.